Welcome to the Comic Binge. I am your host, Paul Herman, and today we are continuing our countdown to Superman, the movie, or Superman movie, or DC Studios Superman? I don't know. Whatever it's called. Regardless, we have a new Superman movie coming out in July, and we are counting down every month a new book or series or trade, paperback, graphic novel, what have you, to prepare for the Superman movie, to get you all ready to go. So you can walk in as a Superman expert with 2 or 3 or maybe sometimes more Superman experts on at a time. But today we've got only 2, but those 2 are very special to me as very dear, close friends of mine. Obviously, I'll get to them in a second. But before I do, those crazy cats, please subscribe to the Comic Binge today. Appreciate everyone who already has. Like the video, all that crap, because I have to say it, because if I don't, no one will remind themselves to do it, and then I don't get any interaction. Interaction doesn't mean new people, yada, yada, yada. All right, anyway, on with the show. Okay, today we've got, obviously, regular co-host of mine, Chris and Javi. Chris, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing all right, my friend. How are you?
Good. Thank you for helping me organize comics and letting me watch your Demolition Man 4K. That was amazing.
Looks pretty good.
Does look very good. And also, I always think about when he drops out of the helicopter, he goes, Phoenix! And like you saying it with it's so funny. It cracked me up when you did that. I was like dying. I was like laughing.
That was when I was a kid, my Stallone impression was a parlor trick, but I think I lost it, unfortunately. I could do it better when I was younger.
You sounded good. You sounded good. So anyway, but thank you again for coming. You know, all I gotta say, people, is get yourself a best friend who will watch football with you, who doesn't even like football, to hang out, organize your comics with you, and then, you know, it's like, doesn't complain one bit. So just for the record, that's how much of a best friend that Chris is. So
what was there to complain about? You got us burritos.
It's fair. I got us.
You had burritos when you watched Demolition Man.
We
did. Because I mean, what's the point?
Should have been. Probably should have been.
But it was a local joint called Tacos Guaymas, and I got a steak quesadilla, which was chef's kiss. So good. So anyway, enough about food. Javi, El Corazon, how are we doing today, sir?
Hey, staying warm. It's like 25 degrees out right now.
How is it 25 degrees in Texas?
Weather?
That's insane.
It snowed overnight. There was snow on the ground this morning. The kids took a walk, took lots of photos, and by this afternoon, 95% of the snow in the backyard had melted, and it didn't look like anything had happened at all.
Well, it's in Washington. It's getting pretty. I was looking at the weather right now. It's getting pretty gnarly out there. It's right now. It's 34 degrees out, and I am freezing too myself. So I have my heater blasting. So anyway,
it gets drafty down there.
Yeah,
it does.
I bet. Yeah, for sure.
Don't trust the space heaters; they're fire hazard.
Dude, did I ever tell you the one? Dude, no crap. I had a space heater. I was like 20 years old. I had my kid, like Lulu was with me downstairs. I saw the cord catch fire in front of my very eyes. I am not joking. And it went like, and then it went out by itself. And I was like, I was like, whoa, it's pretty nuts. Never again will I get a space heater. Anyway, so today, if you're wondering, we are covering a very special story, which I'm going to let El Corazon, a.k.a. Javi Trujillo, talk about, which is going to be, the trade's called President Luthor. And which is, that's a very interesting cover. I prefer Javi, do you have the original, the one that has the flag behind it by chance?
The President Luthor special?
Yeah, that one. Thank you.
Or Superman Lex #1, something like that.
I feel like this should have been maybe this should have been it personally, but I mean, go back to
that cover is the cover of this graphic novel or prestige format story that came out, which took a little inspiration from the real world. And this story is included at the end of the President Luthor. We're not really going to talk about it. I haven't had a chance to read it.
I will talk about it.
Great. Okay, you'll talk about it. Don't spoil it. Well, we technically don't, but I didn't get a chance to read it yet. I never read it. It came out in like the late 80s, maybe early 90s, and it's a real thing for us, right? It's a book. You could get it on the comic shop, but it's also a book in the series. Like it's part of the narrative of the book. Just like in The Flash, there's a life story of the Flash book that's a major plot point for the Return of Barry Allen. DC actually wound up making that into a graphic novel, like what it was in the story, like for real for us to own. And they even matched like the cover after the dust jacket to match what it looked like in the comic. So the trade gets its cover from this story, but primarily, yeah, I mean, we're looking at this. I think it's Glenn Orbick, if I'm not mistaken. It's hard to read the print on this, but we are doing President Lex. Felt it was a very timely story, an important story to talk about. So this came out in 2000. The Superman books were still in the Triangle era. It was before Our Worlds at War, which was a major story that had real world parallels the week it came out because of 9/11. And this is kind of like the lead up to that. And it's always been really key to me because it not only this storyline that launches and goes throughout the entire DCU winds up culminating in a different series in Superman Batman in the first arc of that. But it's something where like we see it play out in other media, namely Smallville. It's something that gets alluded to a bit with and it was something that caught my attention right away when Lex has someone that has like vision powers, like she can see the future. And this lady sees Michael Rosenbaum's Lex in the White House with the black glove that that the comic Lex had because of kryptonite radiation taking his hand. She has a vision of Lex becoming president, and it's something they jump to at the end of the show at season 10, where Lex is indeed the president. It even gets mentioned in the Crisis segment when they visit Smallville again and Lex is the president. So it's something that we don't obviously know a lot about what's going to happen in 2025 Superman, but I think it's clear with all the Luthor Court branding that this isn't going to be the Gene Hackman got to get land because they don't make it anymore Lex Luthor or the mad scientist Lex. This seems to be taking from businessman Lex, and who knows, maybe they will take that Lex down this route to trying to become president of the United States in this new DCU. But we picked this story because it focuses on the billionaire businessman who presents one way to society but has ulterior motives underneath. And that seems to be the kind of Lex, that post-crisis Lex that we're going to be dealing with in the movie.
Yeah.
So,
and for those who are wondering, if I don't put the stuff in the description. I probably should, but I don't. And because I want people to watch the video and interact with us, down here is where you'll find the reading material we'll be talking about. We're not going to try to spoil a lot of it. Javi hasn't read the unauthorized biography of Lex Luthor yet, but I have. Chris, I'm assuming you have as well. I do want to save that for last, for good reason. But
you don't want to spoil the election results either.
Oh God, why do you do this to me? Anyway, so yeah. So if you guys are interested in reading this material, it's all there. You can get the you can throw up Hoopla for me here, Javi. You can get the I read this via Hoopla. Obviously, you can also get it doing DC Infinite, as Ryan Lauer has also said. Thank you, Javi. Those are the ways to read it, and they're pretty easy. I mean, Hoopla is amazing. I mean, I found it pretty easily, to be honest. I was pretty happy. So Hoopla is legit. Read your comics. It's fantastic. That's the cover right there. There's the material if you want to go seek it out. If you have your back issues, whatever, what have you. So anyway, so kind of talking about this story a little bit. I'll give you my first kind of foray into this whole thing.
Well, before you do that, is this your first time reading it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Is this your first time reading? Okay.
Yeah. So when I read,
let me just caveat what you read. Like you had the issues up, and those are accurate, but to my recollection, without going to my long boxes, like they cherry picked the Luthor stuff out of those issues. Like one of the Superman issues is very vignette-y, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff where they just picked out Lex scenes from the comics that we have listed on the screen, and it's not the complete issue. So it makes it more of a cohesive story, and you're not going to be confused by the other side plots that are going on. However, I felt like it made for a very visually choppy narrative, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a good way to kind of segue into all this, because what the one thing about and this actually, to be honest, President Lex helped me kind of solidify what my feelings are of Lex Luthor. I always had Lex was such a weird character for me, growing up, because I only knew him vaguely because of, honestly, the Spider-Man versus Superman comic where Lex Luthor, he was like, who's this bald dude? It must be, if it's Dr. Octopus, and teaming up with a Superman villain, it must be his like arch nemesis. So I kind of figured that out. And then, I kind of remember 77 Superman, or 78, excuse me. And then you have like, I'd see a little bit of Lois and Clark and, whatever. And so it took a while for me to really understand and really get Lex Luthor. I'll be honest, everything that's informed me of Lex Luthor that I enjoy the most is from Smallville, Rosenbaum. I absolutely adore Rosenbaum's Lex, and I think he's great. And so that has always informed me of it's kind of like the thinner, more fit Lex Luthor. So, and that's kind of where they've gone into with the modern, age, it seems like, the last, since probably 2000-ish, maybe more. I'm not sure if that's Lex 2 there with the red beard. I mean, that's a whole
Lex Jr., that was the 90s, which was this Lex, just in a clone body.
Right. Yeah.
And that body deteriorates, and Neuron regenerates him.
Oh boy.
Into a fit Lex, which is right before this story.
So this is another great thing of why here's the thing I'm going to say. I really enjoyed this at first, and I really liked the idea because I thought we were going to get a actual narrative. And for those, I'll give my final thoughts at the very end as far as like, all that stuff. But just from my own reading experience off the bat, I really enjoyed it quite a bit. I burned through this pretty quick. And then it just kind of faltered because there isn't a stopping point that's probably appropriate for the book, because it probably went on for a long period of time, I assume, which I'll let you guys answer that here in a second. But the one thing I'm going to say that I think that even though there's not a traditional narrative that a storyline that gets you from point A to point B in this comic book, graphic novel, or trade paperback, excuse me. So, by the way, someone criticized me when I called the trade paperback a graphic novel. They're like, no, it's a trade paperback, not a graphic novel. Graphic novels are not collected. I'm like, shut the hell up. Like, no one cares. They're all the same. Anyway, this small little nitpick there. The thing is that this story won't give you that, but I did appreciate getting in the head a little bit more of Lex himself, and getting a little bit more of the idea of what kind of this version of Lex is. And it was nice to get that and get a different, get a little bit of a different insight than I was used to. And it was very informative, to be quite honest. save for the last part, the unauthorized biography. We'll save that at the end. I did appreciate that, even though there's not a through line of narrative, like, here we go, where this is like, now President Lex is going to turn like this, and here's the heel turn, and oh my God, here comes Superman, it's from the view. Sorry, that was for Chris there. There was
my God,
my God,
Superman, he's back.
There was none of that, which I think was really hurt the reading experience as a whole. But I still found the story informative for Lex. So if you're wanting to get into Lex, I think that is still a positive reading experience. So, Chris, why don't you take it away from here?
Oh gosh, look, there are really good examples of villainy across superhero storytelling. In fact, I think superhero stories don't get the credit they often deserve for crafting lasting, emotionally real antagonists. Even someone like the Joker, who's such an extreme personality, is designed in such a way in modern storytelling to be such a great foil for the hero. It's one of the reasons why I think a Joker story without Batman is kind of a useless exercise, and except for some limited examples, I suppose, but designed as a foil, designed to put whomever the hero is through the ultimate test. And I think that's true of most comic book supervillains, except one, and it's Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, to me, represents maybe the single greatest villain in the history of story because of his ingenuity. The fact that he is, Batman in DC Comics and certainly in comics elsewhere gets so much credit for being a self-made man. And we've talked before, particularly on Knights Never Die, about how there is still a fantastical element to Batman and the sort of vicarious process of living through the heroic side of things through him. But with Lex Luthor, his ingenuity is such a polar opposite of most of the heroes in the DC universe, and certainly across superhero storytelling and really across fiction in general. When you're talking about diametric opposites of good versus evil, Luthor is, particularly since John Byrne reinvented him with major input from Marv Wolfman, not only is Lex Luthor's brilliance emphasized, but his ruthlessness, but also too, and is his command of public image. I think that's something that really gets overlooked, particularly by a lot of other media adaptations of Lex Luthor. This is a guy, as we've read in this story, whose command of public image earned him the presidency of the United States. And when you have these really zany, off-the-wall portrayals of Lex Luthor, you automatically signal to me that you really don't understand who he is. So that's why, I had some big problems with the DCEU conception of Lex, and persisting the 1978 conception 20 years post-Byrne in Superman Returns was, to me, maybe the biggest misstep that movie had, because this is a human being whose ruthlessness, whose viciousness, and whose Machiavellian command of all of the resources at his disposal he fashioned himself to be the arch enemy of the most powerful being on the planet. And there are very few comic book supervillains who can make such a similar attestation. Lex Luthor is a singularly terrifying force in the DC universe because of the resources that he commands and because of his ability to keep people in the palm of his hand by convincing them that he's on their side, and by convincing them that the hero that you are seeing actually save people from wrecked trains or broken bridges or crumbling buildings, he's nothing compared to me. Here's how I am actually your hero. And people believe it. And that's one of the things that I really feel like makes Lex Luthor such a malevolent force, an underrated malevolent force in the wider DCU. This is a universe that has Darkseid, it has Atrocitus, it has Despero, and they don't hold a candle to the Machiavellian evil of someone like Lex Luthor. And it's purely because he stands as a diametric opposite to the world's greatest hero, the most powerful thing in existence in the DC universe, and he stands toe to toe. Now, you could argue Superman's restraint allows Lex to be in that position, but at the same time, too, what other person in the DC universe that is not bestowed with extra normal powers could ever stand on that level? I don't even think Bruce Wayne, if he were inclined, could reach the heights that Lex Luthor reaches. And a lot of that conception is because of what John Byrne and Marv Wolfman did in the earliest days of the post-crisis era. But then you get to this story, and it really pushes home just how much of a command of image and the forces available to him that Lex has. He is a fascinating character that in modern cinema certainly has never been explored to his full potential. Superman and Lois took things in a very different direction. I mean, in a more recognizable direction, I should say. Michael Rosenbaum, absolutely a wonderful portrayal of Lex Luthor. And yet, we still haven't really scratched the surface of the kind of threat that Lex Luthor really represents in a world that Superman even inhabits. So I have a lot of high hopes for what the movie is going to do. Nicholas Hoult looks straight out of central casting from my brain, and the glimpses that we've seen of him are really encouraging. And I think James Gunn even said, Lex Luthor is terrifying, and he should be, because this is what happens when you can turn the pursuit of power, the relentless pursuit of power, into a human being with the intellect of, the most brilliant minds on the planet. That's Lex Luthor. And, writing him off as just the weird, bald enemy of Superman, oh, man, you are not scratching the surface. I'm not talking to you guys in particular, but just people who discount Lex really should take a closer look at some of the best stories with him. When it comes to this story, the first time I read it was actually in 2010. So it was a little bit older by that point. I had just endured a rather devastating personal loss and decided that I would lean into Superman as a way to try and, get myself through it. And I decided to start reading Jeff Loeb's run on Superman. And man, that was a great run for me to read at that time, because not only do you have Ed McGuinness jumping on at 154, Loeb started at 151 on the main title of Superman Volume 2, but the variety of storytelling was just phenomenal, at least to me. You had really good uses of characters in the Justice League. I think Loeb is really good at characterizing Lois in particular and the other members of the supporting cast. But the Superman-Lex dynamic hit such a fever pitch over the course of that run, and most of it was because of President Lex. It was a captivating story, and it does, when you actually read the issues month to month, and I didn't really spend a lot of time with adventures or action when I was reading Loeb's run in particular, because he was just on the main Superman title. That was what I was focused on, but it was a great thing to be focused on. Not only do you have this story, but you have maybe one of my absolutely favorite applications of Dracula's interference in a superhero story. That's a personal favorite. And but the moral, I guess, conundrum that Superman himself has to navigate through this is he starts to realize that people don't see Lex Luthor the same way that he does. Yeah, it's extraordinarily informative about just the kind of command of image that Luthor has, while combining his ability to use all of the resources at his disposal without any of those pesky moral compunctions getting in the way of his pursuit of power. So I really, really like this story, and I think it's very indicative of just how it's a different shade of the brilliance of Lex as a villain, but it's a really important one, and it's arguably most potent here.
I think it's worth noting that, without not spoiling other series too much, that this is also post No Man's Land, and he had a pivotal role to play towards the third act of that story. And that story also plays into his presidential bid and having, garnering some of that public trust that he would need to win the election. Part of it stemmed from a Batman title. So I appreciate the fact that, we talk about shared universes all the time and how Lex really does become, he's not just relegated to Superman titles. We see him in Detective at some point too, during this presidential era of him, case in point. So, and also to Chris's point about Jeff Loeb, like there's a great Christmas issue where Superman goes to visit everybody and give them Christmas presents. And we get to see, the wider, the Justice League's opinions about Luthor and, what that means. And just every character gets, I talked about how kind of choppy the art is at times, but like every Justice Leaguer gets a different artist. Like Mike Wieringo drawing Green Lantern is just perfection right there. And you get Art Adams doing the Wally West Flash, and Aquaman is Rob Liefeld, and Ian Churchill at Wonder Woman. So you get like some pretty interesting people, contributing art to this story as well. But it also makes for an interesting reading experience when you go from something like that to then a little more cartoony here. But even like Paul Pelletier does a really good McGinnis impression.
Underrated artist overall.
No, totally.
Oh, I love Pelletier.
He did a bunch of he almost works like Alan. His work also reminds me of Alan Davis, if it's the same.
Yeah, I could see that.
I'm thinking of, because I want to say he did a lot of Guardian stuff back, the original, like, the new incarnation of Guardians back in 20. God, it's been a while now. Whenever the Guardians first came back, in 2008 or whatever, 9 or whatever, and they came back with the incarnation that the movies used. Basically, he was the artist on it, and also did a lot of the Annihilation, I think, Conquest stuff. So he was very instrumental in that. In that way, yeah. And I noticed his art immediately. He is an underrated artist, absolutely. I think he's in. Yeah, here's the other thing too. I think he's also in Geiger. He fills in for Gary Frank. Because I remember I saw his stuff and went, this guy looks familiar. I went, oh, it's that guy. I forgot about him. I just keep forgetting about him. But he is a goddamn great, solid artist, man.
After Ivan Reis left Aquaman in the New 52, Pelletier became the primary artist for the remainder of Johns' Aquaman run. So I assume that's where they met, and that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, and even though it's Gary Frank, right? I mean, come on, he's the G, but it doesn't. His style fit pretty solidly with Geiger, which I thought it worked really well. So I mean, he's a good artist. So yeah, all right, just want to mention there, great artist.
Yeah,
but
go
ahead, Kirsten.
No, I mean, it's just like there are a lot of really fascinating dimensions for Lex during this time. Javi, you already mentioned No Man's Land, and one of the things that was so cool about No Man's Land, particularly these issues written by Rucka, where Lex did show up, which is also depicted excellently in Rucka's No Man's Land novel, by the way. In fact, that's probably what I think. Paul, come on, man. You really need to knock off your axe to grind with prose. Good storytelling is good storytelling. And Greg Rucka has an incredible command of the actual written word.
It says comic binge. Anyway.
And it was a novel adapted from comics, right? Arguably a more efficient delivery mechanism than No Man's Land, by a comic writer. And
Comic binge. Anyway.
Continue. I guarantee you would like it more than The Clown Who Laughs at Midnight.
Yeah. Yeah, you would.
Comic binge. Anyway, continue.
Batman's a comics character that can show up in multiple things. Anyway, No Man's Land was a really fascinating deployment of Lex Luthor because Superman, of course, intimately understands the threat that Lex Luthor represents. But Batman is kind of more of a peer of Lex's. And he immediately recognizes the political maneuvering that Lex is employing by, stomping into Batman's own territory. And there is an awesome scene in No Man's Land, very similar to this one that's on the screen right now, where Batman tries to, warn him away. Luthor has such confidence in what he's doing and in the limitations that he feels like Batman has, that Luthor bests him basically in his own city for all intents and purposes. I mean, Batman gets a one-up a little bit later on, as he's, want to do. But that's the thing that I don't think Luthor gets enough credit for, is that there are so few villains, particularly outside of Gotham City, that can so easily stalemate Batman. But Luthor's one of them, and he does it on a pretty consistent basis. And that's why Superman is one of the characters, if not the only character, who is most equipped to handle the kind of villainy that Lex Luthor represents. He needs almost that overwhelming force of power represented by Superman to actually keep him somewhat in line. But this story that we read asks something completely different of Superman in managing what Lex is, as just like a power-hungry maniac. And Superman has to do it within recognized guardrails of institutions that he inherently believes in and that he continues to believe in, even though a result was delivered that he really, really doesn't like here. Multiple times over the course of these issues, and not even in issues that are completely collected in this trade that we read, he kind of wrestles with this reality of people having a different conception of Lex than he does, which allowed Lex to ascend to the level that he did. And watching how Superman navigates that is really fascinating and even inspiring to a degree, because what a shock. Superman's inspiring, but it just asks something so different of him. Not that Superman is a character who is prone to wanting to use his fists to solve a problem. I mean, if he's called to do that, he'll do it better than anybody, but that's not his default stance. So he has to figure out a more nuanced way to approach the future with Lex as the president of the United States. And we don't see it play out in the fullness of time within this trade. But if you do keep reading and you see how Superman has to navigate those realities, it's pretty fascinating. And you even see Luthor show up as president in other stories. I mean, probably most notably in Hush. You see President Luthor very, very briefly. And it doesn't really have a lot of bearing on the story. Talia's arc on there has more bearing on what happens in that individual moment. But it's just such an interesting time for the DC universe, because there is such an upendedness to the perception of what it will take to actually put him away this time. And there is some, I guess, optimism among some of the heroes, Aquaman in particular, that maybe this will actually end up being a good thing. But it's Lex Luthor. It's not going to end up being a good thing. And that plays out in the fullness of time. But Aquaman's inclusion here in navigating those political realities, and Luthor locating something that he could exploit to potentially pave the way to the presidency more efficiently through Atlantis, that's something here that I really appreciate as good DC Universe storytelling, because Loeb is clearly a creator who recognizes you have all these toys in the toy box. Mm-hmm. Let's put them all to use We have this king of an independent nation state under the water. How does that interact with Lex Luthor's pursuit of power? And how can he effectively neutralize a force that would be able to take him out, like Aquaman? And the way that he does that with the political maneuvering is pretty brilliant, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
Really quickly, I'm going to throw it to you in a second, Javi, but I want to add with this is that I actually appreciated Superman's response to Lex, and it's unfortunate again, one of my biggest criticisms of the story that of President Lex, which you can get on Hoopla or DC Infinite. I really liked how Superman had to really think about how he was going to react if he won the presidency, and I thought that was handled pretty well, to be quite honest. And I liked it, and honestly, that was kind of what made me think this might be a really fun story, which didn't, again, the narrative wasn't really there, unfortunately, but I did appreciate how Superman's reaction was kind of a thing, and it was a real focus point, which I thought was really cool. Like, it wasn't just like, no, he is evil. Huh! It was like he had to really think about it, and again, maybe there is a better trade down the line with it, or an omnibuy, if you will, or a compendium, as DC likes to put out. Which, by the way, DC compendiums I think are legit. I much rather read a compendium than an omnibus, but that's just me.
Here's the thing too, is that leaders lose, but real leaders aren't defeated by loss. They figure out a way to move ahead with it. And that's one of the things, because Superman has to navigate a lot of different realities over the course of this. Not only does Lex Luthor become the president, and he has to figure out exactly what his intentions are and how he's going to, wield the levers of government to get the things that he wants, but he also has his own leadership position, and he knows that there's a lot of people with eyes on him. That's one of the reasons why he doesn't actually appear at the inauguration. That's kind of an interesting moment that's depicted in the trade. He's conscious of the signal that could send to other people, but that doesn't mitigate his feelings of responsibility to the institutions. And he knows that, in order to try to continue fighting for that truth, justice, and the American way and a better tomorrow, everything that Superman believes in, it requires perseverance with a different kind of demand. And that's one of the things that I really do love about this story. As fascinating as Lex is as a supervillain, and certainly maybe my favorite supervillain ever, Superman, the story calls for Superman to kind of take an L in a way that we don't typically see him take, while still having the bravery to persevere in light of something that it's not just a defeat. He's demoralized because of the inability of other people to recognize just what Luthor is, but it doesn't occur to other people because they don't see Lex in the same way or have the same kinds of interactions with him. Superman slowly begins to understand that, and the way that he chooses to persevere is really great, I think.
Javi?
Yeah, there's a lot to touch on there. One of the things we've talked about how he perseveres, his initial reaction in this is to give up. And the Wave Rider, or not the Wave Rider, because that's Legends of Tomorrow, the Linear Men show up and show him what the consequences are of opting out and just throwing your hands up in the air and walking away. And they show him the future with no Superman, and it's not a good one. But I really appreciate, as someone who's read a lot from this era, like how it does touch on so many past stories and aspects of the DCU. Like we brought up how Talia, he visits Talia. So we've got another Batman connection, and he has her take over Luthor or LexCorp. And Saving Superman brought it up in the chat. John Byrne's Superman #9, it has a little backup story of like 900 miles to Metropolis. And it's a thing that Lex does where he goes and like offers people a better life, kind of, but it's in a tempting way to do it. Like, it's kind of like a deal with the devil if you accept it. And he always gives them just enough time to make the decision, but by the time they make the decision, he's already gone and the offer's off the table, and he's just doing it to crush people. And in this story, it's a waitress at a diner 900 miles outside of Metropolis, and that's something that comes up and bites him in the ass a little bit when he's campaigning, and that woman shows up. Can you get rid of that there, Paul? And shoots him, basically, because of the slight that he gave her, because she knows what kind of a person he is, which makes Lex happy beyond belief. And I put this in specifically too because this is one of those Pelletier panels, and there's a little coffee cup in the bottom from Radu's coffee, which is a Green Lantern reference. So it was one of those stories where all these little aspects of the DC universe that I was reading all coalesce into this big story. And I don't know, it definitely captures a certain vibe from that era, and it plays out over the course of what a typical, for like a real-time typical administration would be, because this is 2000 and the real resolution of this comes in 2004 books. So there's always that weird comic to real world timeline thing. But it kind of plays out in real time for us for what a 4-year term would be. Did any of those things, Paul, all the extra cameos that we see, did any of that hinder the story for you as someone who's more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy? You're muted.
I'll touch on a little bit of that at the end, kind of my overall review, but I would say that it both hindered and not hindered, because I do have a decent amount of knowledge of DC too, but I mean, like, it did break up the narrative a lot, and that's kind of the problem with this whole story, is I wish I had more just Lex,
Yeah.
like, and
there's a lot of reactions.
Yeah, which that's to be expected in some ways too. So I don't want to fault it completely, because I'll make it very clear, and you'll see my classic now overall ratings, as I do at the end of these shows all the time now. I'll make it very clear that I don't think they're always I was kind of expecting that. The only thing is that it does break up the flow, and it's kind of to be expected if, depending on, especially this is basically supposed to be just a very kind of like dip your toe in the water for this overall massive story that kind of him being president is for a while, I assume. So,
yeah. And let me just add a little button on that. There was something else too I forgot to mention, that
no pun intended,
with all the little stories that we get, like a key one is the fact that Lex picks Pete Ross as his running mate, as his vice president pick, which Pete had been a senator at some point in the book. And of course, at this point, Pete is married to Lana, Clark's high school girlfriend. And they have a kid whose name is Clark. But Lana kind of throws it in as, it's not named after Clark Kent. It's named after Martha Clark, Clark's mom, because Clark was her maiden name. And there's just a great little, when we talk about all these different reactions, there's a great short story of Superman going to visit Lana. And because back in Byrne's Superman #2, she got kidnapped by Luthor and, kind of put through the ringer to try and figure out who Superman would be, like his secret identity. And that's something she knows and it has to deal with. And we just get like so many reactions of not just the superheroes, but the more everyday people, like we saw with the waitress earlier, and the Daily Planet staff. Like we get to see everybody, which is kind of cool to get these different perspectives.
Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to add can you throw up the biography for me? Javi?
Yeah.
The one thing I'm going to say, thank you.
I'm getting there. There's a lot of images.
No, you're good. No, you're good. I was trying to figure out how I was going to frame this because you haven't read it yet. I'm not going to spoil it, but I want to make sure people understand when I'm talking about like my favorite interpretation of Lex. It's the Rosenbaum. What's the key element of the Rosenbaum, in my opinion, like portrayal and incarnation of Lex Luthor? What's the main one? It is younger and has a established relationship with Clark Kent.
Okay.
And I think that is the best portrayal of I like having them connected. Maybe I know some people are a lot of hardcore Superman fans. I'm curious where you guys kind of fall in that line with that, but hear me out. I just think it's a more interesting tale. And I remember someone, it wasn't that really a bad thing, but it was for those, if you like comic book YouTubers, you know this YouTuber well. Not everyone loves them. I like him and I'll always agree with them. Comics by Perch, he was talking about the new movie and he said he liked how Lex looked, but he said he thought Lex looked too young. I thought it was interesting because I didn't blink an eye at it because I'm used to a younger version of Lex. Whereas, a lot of, I believe Perch is probably older than I am. A lot of Superman fans are older than I am who are used to Gene Hackman. This interpretation specifically, as we have here, is an older Lex Luthor, right? Which honestly, this looks like the freaking Kingpin every time I look at it. So, which I'll get to that in a second as well. So I find this version of Lex so uninteresting when he's an older, like, foil to Superman. I don't like that. I just cannot connect to it as much. That's why when I read Birthright, I really like the fact that Clark and Lex are connected. I like the fact that Lex is younger and more, and I feel like the angle of the older guy being like, you can't be better than me. I'm Lex Luthor. Like, I get that aspect of it, but to me, it would drive someone as a peer even more so to get to be better, to be the godlike person or revere that idea if it were close in age or connected or whatever. But again, if you just make him close in age, that I think is just a way more interesting story because of that whole peer-to-peer level. That works for me from a characterization standpoint a lot better for Lex Luthor. That's just my opinion. Reading this biography of Lex Luthor, it's obviously not that. I'll be honest. Every time I see this version of Lex Luthor in the comic book that we read in this, it felt like Wilson Fisk, come on up. Like, that's exactly what I kept seeing, and I didn't like it. And I understand a little bit of why they put this with the President Lex trade paperback or graphic novel, wink. I understand why they did it because the cover is very, I like the idea of the cover, what it invokes. I don't like how it even remotely connects to the comic, like the previous issues we just read. It feels very out of place, in my opinion, especially because it's so dated, which I don't want to hold that against it necessarily. But when you have this, thank you, Javi, when you have this compared to like the biography when we just saw, it's too drastic. It's weird. Yeah, thank you. And so I didn't really like that. So the book kind of ends on this for me. So Javi, you haven't read it yet, but Chris, you know, you obviously comment about my whole thing about a younger Lex, whatever, but that's where I come into. I prefer like they look like two very similar age characters. And I like that a lot more than being like, I'm an old guy. I don't like your Superman in my thing. Hey, Zach, I love you, buddy. Um, I don't like being like the old guy. I don't like the Superman I don't want Superman messing up my clouds and getting in my alien dust in my face and blah, blah, blah. I don't want that. I want younger Lex. So go ahead and I'll throw it to either one of you can pick that up from here.
I mean, I probably prefer that Superman and Lex be relative contemporaries. I think that there is something inherently competitive when you have a hero and a villain that are in roughly the same age. But that's not to say that I thought that there wasn't value in the original post crisis conception of Lex, because the thing that it provided was that he was such an entrenched player in Metropolis's rebirth, really, that when this upsetting force comes and upends the table, he doesn't know what to do about it, really. He's kind of caught off guard because everybody has been singing the adulation of Lex Luthor as the savior of Metropolis for so long that when someone else comes along and people start looking up in the sky, his ego is so damaged by that it helps to nurture this rage and hatred toward him that I don't think you would necessarily get in the same way had they been the same age. But the competitive aspect in later parts of the post-crisis era, really up through Infinite Crisis, I do think adds a degree of heat to the confrontation between them. And so, yeah, I mean, in that respect, I prefer them to be in relative alignment when it comes to age. But I can see the potential value of having Lex as an older man. I mean, honestly, I feel like they could have done that maybe more effectively in the DCEU. I mean, we were kind of hit over the head with the idea that the Lex Luthor that we saw was actually Lex Luthor Jr. and that his dad was, in my mind, like more of the original post-crisis version of Lex. But in any event, I mean, I don't know if you get the heat on the rivalry in this story as much if there was that difference in their ages. Maybe you would have. It would have been kind of inherently creepier, I think. And when you remove the creep factor from it, I mean, it's kind of one of the reasons why I look at like the original issues of New 52 Action with such adoration, I guess. Grant Morrison's conception of Lex Luthor in those issues was as just like this, super brilliant, nihilistic slob who is slurping down energy drinks as he's trying to figure out what this alien's weaknesses are. And it's only after Superman exerts more authority as a hero in those early days of the New 52 that he becomes kind of fashioned after Superman. He starts taking care of himself physically, and he starts to try to become and assume a symbol of humanity in a positive sense. You know, you can look at that alien hero who doesn't have to try for anything, but look at what I can do. Look at what I have built myself into. And that's certainly an underpinning aspect of Lex's character in All-Star Superman. But you see that play out more subtly, I guess, in the regular monthlies of the post-crisis era. It's not as explicit as Morrison's conception in either of those stories, but that just lends itself more to the idea of one serving as a foil for the other, but also Lex's ingenuity actually elevating him to something of an equal with someone who is physically far more powerful than him or anyone else on the planet is. So kind of a roundabout way of saying I pretty much agree with you, Paul.
Oh, nice. Javi, we're wrapping up here. I know you haven't read the I haven't read the issue yet, but any last thoughts on this topic of the age of Luthor and kind of President Lex in general?
I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing because this is still like it's comics, right?
Sure.
like this guy is still this guy. It's just through magic and the devil, like he came back in this form. So while they may look similar in age here, it actually kind of looks a little Hackman-ish, but like trim. It's there's still an age gap between these two, and I've been thinking about it this whole time, and I don't think I really have a preference, to be honest. Because while I grew up watching like the Christopher Reeve movies and familiar with like the purple and green jumpsuit and obviously the superpowers Luthor armor, it wasn't until like Lois and Clark that I saw like the businessman Lex, and how he responded to Superman, and that was something I could latch onto. Like I found that version really interesting. And then of course with Smallville, then I had that new wrinkle because I knew it was being based on like the Silver Age where, Lex lost his hair when Superboy put out a fire in his lab. So like neither one bothered me, and I don't really necessarily have a preference. I think I really love the arc of Smallville and how they started off as friends and how Lex, you had the downfall of Lex and the ascension of Clark into a hero, and I think they did that really well. So when we tampered with things I say tampered, but like changed the story in Birthright and other iterations, like it doesn't bother me if they know each other as kids, and it doesn't bother me if they meet for the first time in Metropolis. Like I'm pretty, as long as the story's good, I'm there. Just like Superman and Lois, Superman's not really Lex's villain. His greatest antagonist is Lois Lane. So like it's all stories, it's all legends, and it's all up to what serves that story. So I don't really have a preference. But my hopes when it comes to Superman 25 is that we do get this Lex Luthor who is more like a modern corporate billionaire that some people like, some people don't, and Superman and certain people at the planet know the truth about him and are working to expose him using their powers of the spoken or the written word to make a difference, a positive impact. So we'll see what we get. We're less than 6 months away now.
Yeah. And so before I give it to everyone, kind of get a wrap up their final thoughts on this. Again, the issues right here are all there. Go check them out. Pause the video. Do all that stuff. And while you're at it, like the video. Wink, wink. Leave a comment. Wink, wink. Yeah, go check it out here. Lots of good stuff. I'll give you my rankings, or not rankings, my ratings, I should say, of this episode. For those who are new, I have gone by every pick and have given it a overall rating and a new reader friendly rating. So you guys ready to see the goods? Huh? All right, new reader friendly rating from Paul Herman for President Lex is a 5.7 out of 10. Dang. I would say this is probably not the safest thing for if you're a completely new reader to come Superman completely. I would say not the best thing to start off with. I'd probably go a little deeper first before I get into this. If you have a decent amount of Superman knowledge already, like who Lex Luthor is, kind of how comics work, at least I should say superhero comics work, I would say definitely that's more where you should probably go into. It's not a bad way to go. just not a good new reader friendly-ish thing to read. Again, not a bad thing. It's just the facts, right? Overall rating of this, a little bit better. I'd give it a 6.4. It's out of 10. I kept saying my biggest problem with it was there was no through narrative, and the last issue is it feels very tagged on, just kind of last minute, like, here you go, So, but at the same time, I still learned a lot about Luther, and I felt it was still informative to a point and entertaining enough that I did really like it at first. I just wish there was more of an actual story narrative I could go, latch on to. So, Chris, give me your final thoughts on President Luther.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that it's not the most new reader friendly story, but I don't think that means that people who are curious about it should overlook it.
Agreed.
I mean,
yeah, I said that.
There is a lot of really valuable character material here that is so efficiently communicated about why Lex Luthor is such a villainous force in the DCU that I think if you don't really have a particularly well-developed conception of who Lex Luthor is and what he's about, you'll certainly have a far more, I would say, accurate one by the time you get to the end of this story. Because one of the things that's interesting about the way that this trade ends too, and Javi and I were kind of talking about this before we started recording, it's open-ended because the presidency of Lex is not something that it's not something for Superman to punch. It's something for him to deal with in an ongoing capacity, and it adds an interesting shadow to some of those stories as they go, but also what Lex does with the power that he's given. It says a lot about who he is, and we don't really see the cabinet in these issues, but you saw it alluded to in the Secret Files. And I mean, having Frank Rock as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is something that I still freak out about because I think it's just such a cool choice. And you have Sam Lane as Secretary of Defense. You have Amanda Waller in there. I mean, these are some of the big operators of the DCU, and seeing how that kind of throws some interesting developments Superman's way. Absolutely worth reading. This isn't a tour de force of the DCU, but it is a really insightful look into the psyche of its greatest villain. And in that respect, give it the time of day.
Yeah, and I stress only if people are just going straight into this as like, I've read a few comics and that's it, I'd be like, that's why I said that I'm being very honest. The new reader friendly is a 5.4 or whatever it was, 5.7. Because of that reason. So, and the reason why everything's a little lower is mainly because of that. It's kind of thrown together. I liked everything Chris said is absolutely right. You're going to learn about Lex Luthor and some important things. It's as a reading experience, it just didn't, right towards the middle end, it just didn't really do it for me. I love the beginning of this, to be honest. I was really excited. And then it kind of just went, but again, it's the design of this, I think, is mainly just, I'm not really sure what the main design of this was for, to be honest with you. You should have put more in there personally, but that's just me. Javi, final thoughts. This was your choice. So what was your
it's not, it doesn't have the visual consistency of Birthright or For All Seasons. So it's more comparable to Panic in the Sky, where you do get those artistic differences. And so it can be kind of hit or miss on the art for you, especially at this time period. Because I feel like there's a lot of great top tier artists in this, but then there's also like a lot of fill-ins too. But I totally see your point on the narrative and how it's just really the beginning of it. But I feel like because we look at Lex from so many angles, like you get just you run the whole gamut of the DCU at that point in time. From, like I said earlier, like you've got the Man in the Street to Middle America to, you know, the Justice League Watchtower. So I think it paints a pretty accurate picture of who Lex was as a character at that moment in time. And, you know, it's definitely interesting to see how, given our current history, how we've had people upset at elections and how they've taken those feelings too far. Here is someone who has the power to do something about it and is sticking with the rule of law, and, you know, going with what the people wished, even though he knows it's probably not going to be in everyone's best interest at the end of the day. And, you know, going about dealing with it in other ways. So, and like I said, we'll see what kind of depiction Nicholas Hoult gives us and whether or not there's any tie-ins with, you know, Lois and Clark at the planet, because I think Gunn has hinted at it's kind of like they form a bit of a triangle of sorts. I'm not sure what he means by that, because like in Lois and Clark, there was definitely like a love square between Lois and Clark and Lex and Superman. So I'm kind of curious to see where Gunn's going to take it. And you're muted again, Paul.
Amateur hour over here. All right, so next month, gentlemen, what are we picking for the book next month? What is next month's pick? Did we ever decide that yet?
We definitely discussed it. I think it was down to some scheduling on who you could get to fill a fourth spot.
What was it? What was the book though? What was the story? Is it Death? Are we doing Death next month?
I thought that was dependent on who you could get.
I already have someone.
I know you had people, but it's whether or not they were available and we can make all the schedules work. But
if we're doing Death,
we've got the master list
of
stories we want to cover. So,
all right. Well,
that's Death, a conversation for after the show.
Fair enough.
I know you're chomping at the bit for that.
I am. It's gonna be fun. That's gonna be fun. So anyway, next month we got a pretty big. We still have next week, which will be our absolute check-in. Absolute being the absolute DC Comics tie-ins with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. After that, I gotta talk to these cats and figure out what's going on. We are doing towards the end of the month a Ultimate Spider-Man review of the Hickman of the previous year. We got to figure out what we're gonna do for Captain America tie-in, which I think I have an idea for that, but we'll talk about that later.
Captain America.
Oh boy, there we go.
No, that's the name of the story. Like I'm throwing that book out there. It's
we did one.
It's volume. Did you? Yeah. I don't remember. It's volume 1 of Nick Spencer's run, and it's called Not My Captain America, and it's got Sam. It's got I think it's got Joaquin in it as the Falcon. It might be volume 2 that he becomes Falcon, though. I don't remember.
Well, maybe we'll talk about this.
That's a good one. I like that arc a lot.
Okay, fair enough. So we got that. We've got we have another, obviously a kind of the Superman, and so depending on I think is that 4 now? Is that 3? I think it's 3. So we have what, one more? We have Nights Never Die. So we have another Nights Never Die next month. Just gotta figure out the scheduling of all that, but we got a jam-packed next month, to be honest. It's pretty crazy.
Jam-packed every month.
We really do. I spare no expense.
Let's be honest. Yeah, other than the holiday, which I
just cram it all in there. So
All
right. Well, anyway, next week, Absolute Comic Books, DC Absolute Comics edition. Check in. It's gonna get fiery, probably. I'm very excited to talk about these series with these guys, so I'm ready.
Chris, did you invite Peter Vera on?
I did not, actually.
Oh, okay.
But he should. He knows Peter. If he can show up, he's invited anytime. He knows this. I don't have to tell him this.
He's got work. So
I tell him all the time.
I would love to have him on.
I tell Pete, you tell me when you're available. I will get you on the show. If he tells me I can do it tonight, I'd be like, read these comics. I love Pete. Pete is one of my favorite people. In fact, I miss him. Call me again, Pete. I love you. Anyway, Chris, why don't you take us out, my friend?
Read more comics.
Yes, please. And if you don't,